Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Lauren Dorlag. I am the Director of HR Client Relations here at Tandem HR. I've been with Tandem for about 3.5 years, but in the HR space for about 13 years, all in HR business partner type roles, working closely with operations to, really align HR initiatives to business initiatives, wide variety of industries. One of the best parts of working at Tandem HR that I get to work with folks, across a wide variety of industries. So thanks so much, Marcus.
Perfect. And my name is Jesse Simmons. I'm the manager of sales engineering over at ClearCompany, who is the partner that powers Tandem Perform. I'm really excited to be here. I talk to people all day, every day about the challenges they're having and the goals they have with their performance, with their people. And so I'm excited with some of the questions that are already here. And I always love hearing what other experts like Lauren have to say.
Awesome. Thank you both. When we do these, we always like to include internal people at Tandem and get their perspectives, and they can share their experiences. I think, Jesse, this is the first time we've had someone join us from one of our partner companies. So welcome. Really excited to hear from you and hear about share about how, some of our clients can maybe use your software to automate this a little bit. So I think this will be a fun conversation. We get questions, Lauren and I do, and our HR business partners do, about performance management all the time. And I think one of the things that comes up a lot is that performance reviews are really uncomfortable. They're uncomfortable conversations for the employer, oftentimes for the employee. So why do we do them at all? Why don't we just avoid that discomfort? Lauren, do you want to start us off?
Because that wouldn't be any fun. But really, I think when we talk about performance management, that is not synonymous with performance review. So performance management is really wide. And I think of performance management really starts the day someone walks in your door, right? As soon as they're an employee of yours. So performance management is helping top performers succeed. It's helping underperformers improve. But that could be new hire check-ins, 360 feedback, just regular routine feedback throughout the course of their employment. That could mean documenting poor performance and having tough conversations about that. Could mean performance reviews at some sort of cyclical routine. But your employees deserve this. I guess that's why we do it. Sure, it's uncomfortable, but your employees deserve this, just like we all need feedback in a wide variety of life. Your employees really deserve to know where they stand and how they can be their best self on the job.
Yeah, for me, performance reviews are part of performance management. Performance management is really, I think of it as like tending to the relationship between the employer and the employee. And I think it is a relationship. It's a very structured one. And I think for me, it starts even before that, when like you said, when you bring someone in, do they know what's expected of them, right? Have you communicated that clearly? I mean, one way to do that is in job descriptions. Another way to do that is in goals and metrics and things like that. But it's that relationship, and it's really up to the employer to say, here's what I expect of you. And then you need to tell the employee how they're doing. And to the extent you can, if you have tangible data, metrics, to show the employee, this is what I expect, and here's where you are. Then you talk about how you bridge that gap, but it's keeping that relationship in check. And I think that structure is important.
Well, right. And you said something, right? Sorry, Jesse, 1 second.
No, go ahead.
You can't manage what you don't measure. So if there's not something documented, if you're not having those discussions, then the employee might think that they're doing a tremendous job, but they're totally misaligned with what your expectations are. So whether that's super formal or whether that's just, hey, these are the 3 things I really need you to work on this quarter, there needs to be some sort of expectation of what you're looking for.
It's also a great way to check in on the people who check in with our employees. We shouldn't think of performance management as really just there for individual contributors. It's always a great reflection of our managers. We want to know, how do they work together through things like 360s? We want to know, are they providing the environment that a new employee needs to grow through? We talked about those check-ins when somebody's onboarding. Or do we have a process that brings new hires in and makes sure that they're going to be effective, to make sure that they're cared for in the way that's going to help them grow in the role. And then when it comes time to do a performance review, those are just as often a reflection of the manager as they are of the employee. We know what the employees, sort of how their last 6 months, how their last 12 months went. But if we got a team of people who are all underperforming, well, then it's time to look up and say, what's that manager doing? And as a manager myself, it's the scariest time of the year, but it's also the most rewarding when it does go well.
Yeah. Yeah. The feedback goes a lot of ways. It's not just the employer telling the employee, here's what I need you to improve on. It's, you can gain a lot of information as an employer from, all dimensions of your organization. So we talked about like the relationship between the employer and the employee, but when it comes to performance management, Lauren, how does that relationship work?
I think it starts with something as basic as just communication, and really two-way communication. So, I said it earlier, but I can't stress enough. The leader really, they owe that employee regular feedback. So I think it's two-way communication. It's not mutually owned by the leader, just like it's not mutually owned by the employee, but really building that rapport, having that trust and that relationship, right, as part of your culture, where it's okay to share feedback. It's, where as an employee, hey, my leader's going to let me know when I do a great job, and they're going to let me know when I need to improve in an area or when I have a weakness. So I think, just that open communication, one-to-ones, right? Like one-to-ones are such a powerful tool. It's not a chance just to talk about how projects are going, or, as the leader to have your agenda accomplished of what you're looking for, but really one-to-ones of just having routine conversations, just some basic questions to start with. What's going well? Where do you need my support? Is there anything you're stuck on? And one I love to add in is, what are you proud of? Let the employee share with you, right? Something that they might not think to tell their leader, hey, I had this really good interaction and I want to make sure to tell them about it. That's not natural for a lot of people, myself included. But if someone asks me, right, I want you to come to every one-to-one telling me something you're proud of from the last week, or whatever the cadence is. It really helps build that trust and foundation of open communication both ways.
Yeah, and I think you said they owe it to the employee. I think business owners or leaders of a company also owe it to the company. The cost of turnover is high, and I'm sure we will do an Ask the HR Expert about turnover specifically at some point in the near future. But people are people, right? They're complex. They've got stuff going on in their lives, and not that you need to be their therapist, but you also need to appreciate that people are not, they're not machines. They're not a conveyor belt. So checking in on them, trying to vet some of that stuff is like maintenance for the employees that drive your productivity, right? And if you know your business model well, you should know what the employee's responsibilities are and how that fuels your business. And so if you're not checking in on that person, and getting a sense of how they are, that person could be becoming detached, turning over, or just not productive, and you make the decision to turn over. But either way, hiring someone is a big investment. And so I think the employer, the leader, owes it to not only the employee, but to the company itself. And another thing I like to remind people is that to kind of get over the awkwardness, if you have to, giving reviews isn't just, bad news, or it isn't just good news. It's giving reviews is an act of care. You're caring for the employee by telling, like, I want you to succeed, right? It's in my interest for you to succeed too. So I'm telling you this because I want you to succeed and I think you're capable of it. So if I don't tell you that, how are you going to align your performance with what the business needs? Yeah. So I think it's more personal than people historically think of it. Sorry, Jesse, I stepped on you.
No, when we think about those check-ins, when we think about those one-on-ones, there's sort of two other big pieces that I want to touch on. First is, we should never have development conversations just once a year. So often we do a performance review and we go, what's next for you? This is going to be great. And then 12 months later, okay, what's next for you? This is going to be great. Those should be part of those ongoing conversations. And if they're not, if we're just taking that time to be tactical, that does cause turnover. Employees don't feel that value. They don't feel that space to grow. They don't feel like they have a coach, which leads to the second point, which is anytime you look at polling, and if you have the time, Google the Gallup polling about the workplace. They put it out every year. And one of the most interesting things we see is the change in generation to generation of what folks are looking for at work. And when we look at, oh, the Gen Z, they don't want a manager, they want a coach. They don't want a job, they want a career with opportunity to grow and have a new skill set at the end of it. Those are all things that as managers and as a company, we need to be aware of and working towards for that retention to keep people. And of course, we're going to evaluate folks against their work and their job, but we do need to be aware of, great, in order to do that job better, in order to do that job in the modern world, there's some skill sets I'm going to want to help develop and make sure that my managers are constantly talking about that growth with an employee.
Yeah, that's a great point, Jesse. Not just doing it once a year. What do you guys think are the best practices around how often to give or how often to do performance management?
I think it depends on what aspect you're talking of, right? I think if you start at the most granular, right? I think if you're thinking about one-to-ones, I think, right, maybe it's weekly for 30 minutes, maybe bi-weekly for 45 to 60 minutes. I wouldn't stretch those out longer than monthly. It's just too much time in between. Depending on the industry, depending on the role, I totally understand there can be some consideration and differences there. I like to do quarterly, more like intentional talent development meetings, kind of like Jesse said. Monthly can seem really fast if you're working on more of a stretch goal or you're working on more of a development plan. But I like to do, just quarterly check-ins. To Jesse's point, it's not, what do you want to do? Okay, great. And 12 months later, just to keep that alive. Doesn't mean you can't talk about it more often, but just to have a chance to say, we're not going to talk about the business. We're not going to talk about goals. We're really going to talk about you and kind of developmentally. And I think depending on the industry, biannual or annual reviews are great just to kind of formalize that. We'll talk about it more later, but I would say you can't do the annual reviews if you aren't doing the other things because, or you shouldn't, because right, there's going to be surprises. It's too much time in between. It catches people off guard. It's a pie, right? And there's got to be kind of all those pieces of the pie that feed together.
Yeah,
a combination of some.
Check in often enough that you can recognize success nearly in real time, but also that if there's a problem arising, we're not 6 months behind it. I love that quarterly development, unless it's a role that is like very metrics driven in something like a call center. It's really hard to make an adjustment in a month and have that be reflective. That really those 13 weeks, that quarter is almost a perfect time to say, this is what we're going to work on. It's a little more longitudinal, but we are going to have our conversations about it, and someone can make a real impact and real progress on that in a time frame like a quarter.
And I think intuitively that makes sense to people, but how, like, getting a little bit more specifically, how do we document that? How do we keep track of, the one-on-ones, the quarterlies, what are the best practices for that?
Well, we can almost say that that's why I'm here today. I'm going to show you a platform that can help with all of that. And I really do think technology is the key. It takes the weight off of a lot of people's shoulders of trying to track this in Excel, trying to go through your calendar and make sure that every 3 months the meeting says quarterly check-in about development instead of something else, being able to set goals and have reviews that automatically go out with everything we know that goes around that, notifications, reminders, all of that. You can try to do it yourself, but it's such a load on any HR professional to manage that without a platform that I'm always going to say highly, highly recommend exploring the platforms that are out there and having one that works for you to take on as much of this as possible. That also gives you some room to grow. Make sure that if you have some long-term plans, that the platforms work for that as well. But technology is by far the best way to manage this administrative process.
Yeah, I totally agree with Jesse. And the only other thing I'll add is that the technology enables you to be more consistent and to eliminate some of that potential unconscious bias. That you're only doing performance reviews for your top performers, or you're only doing them for your bottom performers. One might intentionally or unintentionally, right, gravitate towards one or the other, which could cause you, right, some risk if you're not being kind of consistent in managing your team, especially if it's for a specific role.
Mm-hmm. if you didn't have a performance management platform, Lauren, how, I'm sure you've worked with clients that don't use a performance management platform. How do you recommend that they keep on top of documenting things and making sure this happens?
Yeah, I'd say I'll start with kind of the what, but even just something as basic as like a fillable PDF form, or some sort of hard copy form that you know what the aspects are. Again, depending on the role, the industry, what my leader is assessing me on ought to be very different what an auto mechanic is being assessed on. Our roles are very different. So there's not necessarily a one size fits all in terms of these are the points. It depends on their role, the expectations, what's in their job description. But I'd say right at the most basic, even a hard copy paper, it could be electronic, but a paper form that has more performance related aspects of the role. And then I'd say always include something from the cultural side, whether that's, communication, teamwork, something like that. Don't just assess them on how well do they do, what's on their job description, but how well do they work with others, collaborate, team player. But yes, we have definitely developed and helped clients develop, even just PDF forms that they can use to assess their teams.
Something else I've used in the past was like a SharePoint, like a Word document, SharePoint, where for one-to-ones, especially, and person on my team will put together an agenda, and then I'll add to that, and we'll just type notes, so we're both seeing the same thing, and we're both looking at it, and that kind of drives the meeting, and then it's there. We can go back to it if we need to. So there's no debate. We talked about this on this date, and here's what you said you were going to do.
Yep. And I'd say, even if, let's say we're talking about performance management in the sense of, and we'll talk about this later, I think, but of having a difficult conversation, having a coaching conversation, some sort of expectation setting, at a minimum, send yourself an email. Just send yourself an email. What is the content of the conversation? It's time stamped, it's date stamped, that could be important in the future. So, I'd say in that case, I wouldn't rely on a piece of paper that gets filed in the notebook somewhere or in the desk drawer. I'd say make sure you have that email to yourself. You could need that in the future if you're putting together a performance plan or any sort of defense.
I'm glad you said that, because you and I have both worked on situations where we were brought in to advise on a termination, and the first question we asked is about performance reviews or performance management. And well, we don't have any documentation, but I'm telling you, we've had this conversation a number of times. Like, appreciate that. I'm not saying you didn't. However, people remember what they want to remember. And unfortunately, when you get sideways with an employee, they're not going to remember the conversations you had where you told them that they needed to improve performance. Right.
Well, it's like, one of the oldest HR cliches in the book, but if you didn't document it, it didn't happen.
Yeah.
So that's great that you want to get to a point where you're making some sort of employment decision or taking adverse action. But, if it's not documented, it didn't happen in the eyes of HR or the law.
Yeah. And I think even having the documentation, like you said, the emails are great, right? Because of the date and timestamp, but it also is, aside from just helping you, if you were to get into like a claim situation with an employee, it's also harder to back away from it. It can actually help influence behavior too, if they understand and they know that it's being documented, that can help influence. Yeah. And that, we've talked about the claim side. What about more the employee, having an issue with the employer, difficult separation, but what about retention? What about retaining employees and talent retention? How can performance management help with that?
I can kick this one off, Jesse, and then I'll hand it over to you. I think it's almost like what comes first, the chicken or the egg. But, I think good performance management leads to good culture, can lead to retention. If you're in a position where you come in every day and you're not sure if you're doing a good job, you never hear any feedback either way. How connected do you possibly, I wouldn't feel very connected to my organization or my leader in that sense. And I think research shows that most employees don't. So I think employees want to know. And like Jesse said, the generational difference, I mean, Gen Z that is entering this workforce in just, right, it's just, they're coming. They want that. They want regular feedback. They want to know how they're doing. And so I would say it absolutely leads to retention, because performance management is really reflective of your culture.
Yeah, high performers want feedback. Like that's the start and that's the end. They want to know what they're doing well. They want to know what they can do better because they're already a high performer and they are looking to grow. There is the other side of this of performance management helps you identify who isn't that high performer, who might not be the best fit for the role. Because when a high performer has to work with a bunch of lower performers, that can be something that again drives them out of the company. Just make sure that they want to go somewhere else where they feel like they're more, not respected might be the wrong word, but they're more around people who are operating the same way they are. So performance management is great for helping us identify and coach high performing people. It's also going to help us identify and then both coach and manage out the folks who might just not be a good fit for the role. Even if a year ago, 2 years ago, they were a great fit, times have changed, the organization might have changed. And we should make sure that we're fair to the organization as well, of knowing, hey, these people aren't really the best that we need in order to stay together and stay whole as a company.
Yeah. A players want to work with A players. Absolutely. And you're right, Lauren, it's a cultural thing that, hey, this is how we work. We not call each other out in like a name and blame, but we identify problems and we talk about them. And if something's not getting done, we're going to talk about it. And I think if you don't talk about, you don't give feedback on performance, I think that, I've heard someone say it leads to FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt, because you don't know where you stand. And I've, been in organizations or worked with organizations before where performance management was driven mostly by personality, who you got along with. And no one likes to be at those organizations, or A players don't want to be at those organizations, they want to achieve. Well, let's talk about one of the things that I think keeps people from doing performance reviews, and those are difficult conversations. You have to give someone really, negative or tough feedback. How would you handle that, Lauren? How would you handle giving tough feedback to a colleague who isn't performing well?
I think there's a couple things that you can start with, but I would say preparation is important. Going into that conversation, if you're not ready or you're not prepared, it's probably not going to, I've seen it not end well, So I would say really think about what this conversation needs to look like, what you want to make sure they understand from it, what you need to make sure is addressed. But do it. And it's hard. It gets easier. It never gets easy, but it gets easier. But I will say, don't put it on the back burner. Don't sweep it under the rug. You're doing a disservice to the organization, to the employee, to yourself, to your team, to your customers. So I would say, right, first prepare, be transparent, right? I think it's okay to share, I need to have a conversation that's going to be difficult, or I need to share some tough feedback with you, whatever it might be. Give them space to be upset, right? Like feelings are involuntary. Feelings are okay. Like this might be something that they are upset with, but preparation could be role play. That could be going to, right, an appropriate peer that you can share this with, or your leader or someone, and just say, hey, I need to have this difficult conversation and I'm scared, or I don't know what to say, or, I don't know what I would say if they say that. So prepare, be honest, be transparent, and don't lie. So, right, if they say something, don't, and I guess what I'm saying is kind of don't sugarcoat it, but also don't lie. If they say, well, is this just your opinion, or do others feel this way? You need to be ready and be confident enough to say, I have heard this from others in the organization. This isn't just my opinion. It's hard. Don't get me wrong. It's hard, but you are never taking what I'll call taking the easy way out and not having the conversation it's just going to be really detrimental to everyone involved.
Yeah. And I think you said this, but like telling them up front, it's going to be a difficult conversation. going right at it, I think is in some ways harder, but it's also the right way. I'm not a fan of the compliment sandwich where you tell them, hey, thanks for helping out with this. However, you did a really shitty job, but I really appreciate it. Like the message
They
gets
hear,
much.
I really appreciate it, right? They hear, thank
Yeah.
you, and I appreciate it. They didn't hear the
And then
middle part of,
you've done more harm than good, right? So I
yeah.
think telling someone like, hey, this is going to be a really hard conversation, or hey, I really need to give you some tough feedback, and then give them a second to kind of brace for it, and then you got to tell them. And there's a book called Radical Candor, and I forget the lady who wrote it, but it's the concept I mentioned earlier, that I'm giving you this feedback because I want you to succeed, and I'm caring for you by giving you this feedback. Because I mean, if you flipped it around, like if there was a big problem with I'll just speak for myself. If there's a big problem with my performance, I would absolutely want to know. And it would bother me if I didn't know.
No one wants to be an underperformer, right? No one wants to sit there and be bad at their job. So when you think about it, the sandwich doesn't work. We can't do the layers of compliments within it. I've seen feedback well described as the feedback pizza, where we set a crust where we're all on the same page and we make sure that they know, hey, this isn't about you. This is about us moving forward as a team, as a relationship manager, employee, or as an organization. Like, we're all trying to be together. But what's the other big thing about a pizza? It's that too many toppings ruin it. So if you're having these conversations, you can't go into it and go, you're bad at this, you're bad at this, you're bad at this, I don't like this. It's really got to be condensed into the things that matter, so that someone can get actionable feedback out of it, and they're not walking out going, well, they hate everything about me, so this is terrible. We want to be able to focus in on the pieces that are most important to start with today, and then go from there with that employee.
Love that, Jesse. I'm totally stealing the feedback pizza. I love it.
I'll steal something from Ted Lasso, and that's to be curious, not judgmental. And if someone, I don't assume that why someone's performance isn't up to par, but ask them, let them explain, let them talk. I mean, especially if it's someone who's been a good performer. Hey, what's going on? I've just really noticed something is off, and be curious about it, to help. Don't fill in the why. Like, well, I know why you're upset about this. You may not know, and when you do that, you start to judge people. We actually have
one more.
Go ahead.
One more quick thing I'll add to that. I think I mentioned it quickly, but I'll just put some more emphasis on it, is don't wait. So like I said, have the conversation. Don't wait for the next, performance review or development conversation or whatnot. I'm not saying it needs to be that moment, that day, depending on the severity or the urgency might dictate that. But have the conversation, because the first thing they're going to ask is, why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you tell me this sooner? Why have you waited 2 weeks? They might not know. It might be easy to say they have to know that what they have to know, whatnot. But, whether it's performance, whether it's attitude, whatever it might be, you need to have that conversation as soon as feasibly possible.
So I've got a question here from one of our attendees. We're a small organization, 6 full-time employees. We all wear lots of hats and work together quite well. As a manager, I'm hesitant to begin a performance appraisal process, mainly due to the time it takes. How can a small operation begin a formal appraisal process? Is a formal process needed, or is there a process that fits very small groups? What do you think about that, Lauren or Jesse?
Very small groups is one thing. Wearing a lot of hats is another. When you wear a lot of hats, it's really hard to build a performance review that's meaningful, to say, these were your job responsibilities, because normally you're zigzagging around day to day or even project by project. This is where I always find 360s to be helpful. We're a small group. Let's get feedback a little bit less on what we do. We all know what we're doing and when that's going well or poorly. Let's talk about how we're doing it. Are we working well together? And being able to start with something even simple like a stop, start, continue. What should this person stop doing? What should they start doing, stop doing, continue doing? So we understand what they're great at. We understand what they might be good at if they could, and we understand what's holding us back as a team. That is worth the time investment. It takes a little bit of time to fill it out. You're doing it for 5 other people, but it's not something that's going to overload everyone. You can do it in a week if you do 1 a day. And that's a great way to really understand where can we move forward as a team, while also accepting, hey, if we're all over the place on what our responsibilities are, what we're doing, it's going to be really hard to take that feedback from everyone, or even from one manager, to say, well, you do this little piece that you only do once a month. That part's not great, but this is another part that's really good. That's not always the most useful thing.
Jesse, can you explain just a little bit more kind of conceptually about what a 360 is, just for some of the folks that might be unfamiliar with this concept?
So we think of performance reviews, and that's usually a manager and an employee. And depending on how you do it, sometimes it's an employee doing a review of himself, then a manager doing a review of that employee. Then they meet and go, hey, great, these are all the places where we see that we're aligned, and all the places we see that we're a little bit different. A 360 is saying, well, here you are in the org chart. Let's look all around you. Sometimes it's managers getting feedback from other managers. In a matrix organization, it's team members getting feedback from other team members. Sometimes it's managers getting feedback from people above them, as well as their subordinates. The lovely thing is you get to choose, but it's taking feedback from outside of that chain of command. And it's a really great way to look at how people work together, instead of, did you do your role as your job description may describe it. The other thing about 360s is, depending on your organization, how you want to do it, they're often anonymized, so that somebody has the freedom to say, yes, I want to be open with the way that Lauren uses mechanic analogies, and say, you use them in every call. I never want to hear one again. And when she sees that, she doesn't go, that's Jesse. You know what? He was there for 1 meeting. That's not fair. It allows us to be a little open about what we want to say, while also still usually giving a manager or an HR professional really just the ability to gate that and say, that's not fair, that is fair. So we get constructive feedback. We really make sure that everything is constructive, and we're not worried about someone being aware of, oh, that's how Jesse writes, so I know that was him that said that.
Really, I love that, Jesse. I didn't think about the many hats being the inflection point in that question, but as you started talking, I could also see a small group, depending on how transparent they are to that 360, that might result in shifting responsibilities, or developing more formal roles and responsibilities, which then will start to make performance appraisals more fitting, because you have a more definite, I guess, structure of what each person is responsible for. And the book I'm thinking about there is it's, oh gosh, what is it? Rocket Fuel, I think. EO. It's about the entrepreneur's operating system for small groups. Everyone has a number or a metric that they're tied to, and your responsibility is to make that number go up or down. And here's how you do it. So I think those kind of go hand in hand. We got another question from an attendee. What are your thoughts about the SMART method? And I think that's I think of that as like goal setting. It's specific, measurable,
achievable, relevant,
relevant time. Yeah. What do you think about that? Is that part of performance management as well?
I think it is. I think, like you said, Marcus, it's part of that goal setting part of it. So if my performance is being measured on completely subjective items or things I don't know about, telling me, great job, Lauren, it's like, on what or why, or tell me more. So I think, right, like we said, in some of these, could be different, but specific, measurable, attainable, or achievable, relevant, time bound. The example I've always used is, if I say, I want to get healthy, or I want to lose 10 pounds. Well, how? Am I going to change anything? Am I going to go to the gym 4 days a week? Am I going to lower my calories? Am I going to take a half an hour walk every day for lunch? Those are things that I can actually measure. And so it's relevant for, if I want to improve, I'll use a different analogy, Jesse, right? If I want to improve my accounting skills, or I want to improve my Excel skills, just saying it and opening Excel on my computer doesn't do anything. But if I say I'm going to attend classes, so I think, just the most basic level, it helps goals not be, I want to be a better HR professional. It helps it be specific and really anchor someone to the actions that they're going to do related to that goal. So I think it's incredibly helpful. I've used it for, probably in every role I've had, at least in some capacity.
I think SMART goals are great. It's not even a criticism. It's more a criticism of me, is that putting those together is hard. like developing the goals is hard because you have to put a lot of thought into it. And then once you've got it though, it's like, oh man, this is, it's like, I don't have to think about losing 50 pounds. I have to think about, okay, here are the things I'm going to do. And you can focus more on the process because you've already done the hard work of mapping it out. And I think it's it lends itself to accountability then, right? It's more work on the front end, in my opinion.
Yep.
Let's see, doing a time check here. I want to be sure that we have time to take a peek at the system. So let's we have a couple questions that we got before the webinar. Our organization is in a calendar year, January through February. Assuming that means for like fiscal year purposes or review purposes. Does Tandem HR provide annual orientation or training for employees on using the Prism system features and reports? Is there a recommended time? I think I'll start us here, Lauren. I think on orientation and training for using our systems, we are starting to get better about being more proactive. So we do this webinar every month, Ask the HR Expert. We're also doing client workshops every month. Those are recorded. Those are on our client resources page. If you are a client of Tandem, please reach out to your HR business partner or send me an email and I can get you access to that page where we have those trainings recorded.
We also have a training library that has both some like PDFs as well as videos on some of the most common functions.
Mm-hmm.
So the broader kind of everything, like you said, Marcus, but then if there's specific items within the system that you need training on, we have that as an option as well. But yeah, if there's specific training, I'm not sure who this came from, but if there's specific training that they're looking for related to the system or performance management, and they're a current client, it sounds like their HR business partner could absolutely assist with that.
We also got a question before the webinar today. I'm looking for system support for PM and training for a few staff members. I'm guessing that's project management, perhaps? Or
probably performance management. Probably performance management. Similarly, I'd say, yeah, if that is your question, reach out to your HR business partner, or Marcus will have his contact info at the end. Reach out to us and we'll make sure that we provide the support you need for performance management or project management, whichever one it is.
Yeah. I can't believe I just whiffed on that. That'll be in my performance review. Yeah. Another question we got, is there a template that can be used to conduct performance reviews? Our organization is small and personable, but we're growing. What do you think about that, Lauren?
I think there's a framework, a loose guide, but like I said, right, a performance review is not a performance review depending on the industry that you're in. So like I said, I'd make sure that there's actionable pieces that relate to that performance, right? If accuracy is important in a manufacturing environment, that should be in there. Safety should be in there for sure for a lot of those types of roles. But maybe accuracy isn't as important in a different role. So I wouldn't say there's like a set set of things to manage on, but goals is a good one to start with. Any goals, any attributes or things that are crucial to their role. And then, like I said, some sort of cultural, how do you work with people if working with people is part of your role, something like that.
Yeah, I think it's, there's probably templates out there, but to do it really well and honestly, probably to make it worth its time, it needs to be something that really ties back to your organization and that position.
Right.
So we're at 1:43. I think that probably is a good segue into, talking about using templates. Jesse, could you give us maybe a 10-minute overview of what the ClearCompany performance management system can do and help us document some of this stuff and make some of these things a little bit easier?
Absolutely. So we'll take a walk through the tool. And this is something where this tool is built to be really easy to use with Tandem. We access this tool right through single sign-on. It's not something we're even managing another login. But pretty much everything that we talked about today, you can perform that action. You can do that in this tool. And that's great if you're just starting out. We just talked about templates. It's something that's in here. Or if you've been doing performance management for a while, came to this webinar just to get a little insight into the state of the industry or the state of the art and want to use all the tools in here. I'm going to start and really go through this as if I'm an employee, because performance management is really about employees. It all rolls up to everyone else, but really always focus on the individual, as a lot of these questions did. So when I come in here, I get to see things like my goals. I can take a pulse survey and I see the success that other folks have had. We're pulling information out of Tandem day in and day out. So oh, there was an anniversary. Oh, hey, someone's birthday. Or we recognize somebody and that shows up as well. We see our teams, we see our manager. It's all in one place. If I am a manager, I do want to talk a little bit about those goals. We love SMART goals, and we'll talk a little bit more about them. But I, as a manager, and anyone here, you get to see everybody. You get to get a quick overview. How are we doing? How are these individuals doing? When we want to look at goals, I see my person, okay, Hallie here, she's got a few of them, and they're weighted. We know that they're specific. And I can see, okay, I have this goal. I know what I'm trying to do. It is specific. It might be measurable. It is relevant to her role. It is time bound because it's due in 2 months. All of those things are built in. But we also make sure that when we're looking at a goal, we don't want anyone living in a vacuum. So we align our goals with the other folks in our chain of command. Our president, our CEO, whoever it might be at the top, is always going to say, this is what we're trying to do as an organization, this year, this quarter, whatever it might be. And those goals trickle down. And one of the big parts about the SMART framework is it needs to be relevant to the employee. So when we take that big idea, how do I make it relevant to the person that we're working on and make sure that the goal rolls up to those big overall ideas, but still stays something that this person should be responsible for? With our goals, I provide feedback as an employee. I'm prompted to do so. Managers then get notifications and provide feedback as well. We want this to be a conversation. We don't want this to be, as we talked about, something you see once a year and never see again. And all of this information is pulled right into a performance review, which we'll see in just a minute. But outside of goals, that's what we know we're trying to do, right? Goals are what we do day in and day out. I know I'm hammering away at this, trying to achieve it. What else am I doing on a maybe weekly, bi-weekly, hopefully not monthly, maybe more than that basis? I'm probably talking to my employees. I love talking about one-on-ones because our tool really provides a shared workspace for that conversation. In our one-on-one tool, both managers and employees have access to add new things, whether it's a task that I have to do at a certain time. Maybe it's, hey, I'm going on vacation, just what do I have to prep for? Or those career development conversations. And with our tool, little things that we finish, hey, I found my 10 new candidates. Click of a button, it's gone off my agenda. But those development conversations, they're there until we're both ready to get rid of them, until we've completed it. It's a way to make sure that our conversations are more than just those, hey, how you doing? Great. Do you need anything? No, not today. Great, we're done. That's not a great one-on-one. That's not a useful one-on-one. We want to take that time and be intentional about it. And that's something that we really like doing and believe that this tool really helps folks plan out. As an employee, I can throw stuff on here. As a manager, I can throw stuff on here and make sure that the conversation, if it's every 2 weeks, I'm still remembering what happened last Tuesday because I added something at that time. Now, we did talk about remembering, sending ourselves emails to remember, hey, did this go well? Did this go poorly? One thing I want to note is we offer the ability to leave these notes for ourselves to make sure that, okay, if Hallie's been late for the 3rd time in a row, I can document that this has happened. I can leave myself a note about this, make sure it's locked in here. This will pull into performance reviews as well. But when something like that happens, there's a space for it that we track, of course. When did we have this conversation? What day, what time, all of that. What did the conversation entail? But I hate talking about the bad stuff, right? We all talk about bad stuff. We read the news, everything's bad. I want to talk about the good stuff too. And that's celebration, that's shout outs. Our platform allows for that. We want to celebrate people who do well. We want to make sure that anyone, when they have a success, the more people see it, the more likely they are to replicate it. They understand that their good work is known amongst the company, and they're going to work harder and work better in the future. We do this for one person, we do this for a group of people so that we can retain our best people because they see themselves being recognized. They see that the work they do is understood by those around them. Now, We're going to transition to everyone's favorite time, which is doing performance reviews. Everyone loves doing them. I'm sure no one here has ever skipped doing one because they're so much fun, but we do try to make it easy. I'm going to start with how we send them out, because for folks who've never done it before, really even just starting can be a real bear. I'm doing date-based performance review. All I do in this platform is choose, what am I calling it? What do I want to tell people to do? What's the workflow we're using, right? Is there a self-evaluation? Our manager is going to be involved. When does it start? When does it end? And then the content. I bring this up because if you've never done this before, it can be really hard to start. And we have a lot of templatized items in here. You want to do a semi-annual review where we're doing exempt employees? Great. There's something to start with. Just so you can, if you want to add paprika to this recipe, go for it. But everything is chopped up and ready for you to use and customize as you need. We want to make sure that for folks who just have never done this before, that's not a barrier to starting. Then the last piece of our process is just choosing who are the people in here. Now, a nice thing I want to point out, this is kept up to date with your payroll. So you never have to worry about, you just hired somebody, are they in here? Somebody left, are they getting a review? Nope, always kept up to date. So whether we want to use everybody, just grab some folks in a certain role or certain department, you can run the reviews you need with the click of a button. And then administering them, who wants to have a folder on your desk that people just put them in? We never know who's actually got it done. In this platform, in Tandem Perform, super easy to see what's out there, who has yet to do their self-eval, what managers haven't done theirs. All managers always get their employee or their reviews done. I don't know whether there'd ever be a manager who would not do it. Whatever your workflow is, you get to see where we are in it. So we understand, hey, I got to reach out to Kate, make sure she gets this done. I got to reach out to these other people who haven't finished their self-evaluation and get it done. Doing a review means actually doing it. So we want there to be some accountability. What does it look like for an employee? I'm going to show you two different views of this. Now, we talked about a review being specific to the employee. Here's one that's been completed, and we have a library of behaviors in our platform to help you identify, what am I looking for in a job? What am I measuring people against? This person's an HR professional. They need diversity and inclusion training, employee engagement, strategic planning, all of these things. And we want to evaluate somebody against that. So really easy to do a review that says, this is what's part of your job. It's not part of someone else's. This is your job. How are you doing against that? How did you do with your goals? We bring that in. Did you get any of those shout outs, that recognition? Or did we leave any notes that we want to take a look at? All of that's right here in one place as well. But some of you are probably looking at this and going, look, I don't need to plan out new goals or answer long questions in a review. My people are walking around all day. They don't have time for this. I get it. And that's why our tool is also going to work for folks like those. It works on any device you want. And if we need a shorter review, something that's just a little easier to fill out for the first time, or just it's something that's going to be a little more transactional, that's totally okay. We want to support everybody where they are and make sure that employees can get reviews so that they understand how they're performing. They understand what they do well and what they need to work at, because we talked about how important that is for our development as well as our retention. I did bring up 360s. It's something our tool does, and it's something I personally love. Now, these are anonymous. We can just see, I come in, I understand, I got 3 different scores on this question from 3 different people. They've provided me some feedback. Nice to know that they say mostly nice things. I am fantastic to work with, of course, but I do need to improve my feedback skills. I should be a little more constructive. I got to get away from the sandwich, maybe, and towards the pizza. Things that are helpful for me to see, things that are helpful for me to know, but I'm not going and yelling at an employee or a colleague that gave me this. Then what do we do with all this info? We can store it away. We're going to do that. We're going to make sure you always come into your filing cabinet and see that these reviews are here. But you've done all this. Let's actually get some data out of it. Let's be able to use it. Let's be able to see which employees are really high performers. Which of the employees at my organization are the best, which maybe aren't really particularly good at all. But let me break that down into different parts of the business. I want to understand team by team, segment by segment, where is their success and where are there people that are not so successful. And I always come back to managers being key in the performance process of keeping employees engaged. Some of that has to do with making sure that when managers are giving out reviews, we're ensuring equitability. If we're going to base things like a performance improvement plan or a bonus or a raise or a promotion on performance reviews, let's make sure that two people are looking at their employees the same. And that's really crucial to get employee buy-in to a review process. If they think they're doing a review, but no matter what happens, their manager is a harder grader than that team over there who keeps getting promoted and keeps getting pay bumps, that's not good for us. It's not good for retention. It's not good for morale. It's not good for the company because we're maybe losing people who really would be top performers if they had the opportunity. So the ability to calibrate and say, Corey, your average score over here, 4.4, your team might be the Avengers, but I'm pretty sure they're not. And Jake over here, whose median score is less than 3, 2.8, Jake, you got to have another cup of coffee before you do these reviews. Like, you are a bummer when you're doing these. And I don't think your team is that bad. Their performance hasn't shown that. Now, for anyone who needs help to really understand who is the next one up on base, who's the people that maybe are a little farther behind, 9-boxing is a really effective way to do that. Understand who has the potential to do well, who's actually done well. When you graph that and see these are people with high potential and they've been high performing. Lucas, he is the next person to get promoted. Great. All the people up here are. But Mark, he's low performing. He's low potential. My old boss used to say he would do great on someone else's payroll. That's probably our next move to make sure that we can bring someone in who fits in that upper right-hand corner. And now I've talked a lot here. If you have questions, reach out to Marcus. The last thing I want to touch on, and we didn't have a question on it, but it's something that can be pretty important. Make sure that if we're doing things like reaching out to employees, talking about surveys that we send out, those are promises that we are making to employees. If I'm going to ask their feedback on how we're doing, if I'm going to send them out a survey, which the tool does to say, how are you feeling? Why do you stick with us? What works? What isn't? This is a promise that we're going to make a change if they give us bad feedback. They should feel free to be open, and we should be open to take it. And we want to make sure that when we look at a survey as it comes back, we can not only see what do our employees think about us today, what do they think we could do better, but importantly, let's run this again in 6 months and see, are we keeping that promise? Because if we're not, you're sure to see employees go, hey, I either don't want to do this anymore, I don't want to engage in this process anymore, or I'm going to go find a company that is going to hold themselves to be accountable to employees. That was a lot. You're going to have questions. That's why Marcus is here.
Thanks, Jesse. And we had several questions pop up while you were presenting, and I just answered those in the chat.
Perfect.
But I guess I want to remind everyone that we're going to do for Tandem clients, we're going to do a deep dive on this platform in our client workshop in December. I believe it's December 6th. So be on the lookout for the invitation there. A couple of you have asked about that in the chat, and I'll make sure that you get the invitation. So we'll do a deeper dive on this platform. And I guess, let's see if we could go back. I want to make sure everyone has contact information if they have questions that we don't get to during our discussion here. I know we're running a little bit short on time. So please right now take this opportunity. If you have questions that you're thinking of, put them in the chat, and I'll kind of do some housekeeping here. Like I said, this is being recorded, so you're gonna get a recording of this in your inbox. If you don't get it, please send me an email. I'll make sure that you get it. The purpose of our discussion today was really performance management at a high level, and then filtering down more and more granular to actually how does this work in practice, and how can we automate some of this stuff with software solutions. So we covered a lot of stuff today. We had one question that we didn't get to, and that is, let's see, I don't have one in the chat. So Lauren, we talked about this one a little bit before, and that is, how do you handle a difficult, or how do you handle a high performer who has a toxic attitude? How do you performance manage that person?
All right, this is going to be our finale.
If
I had a quarter of time, I see, I'm trying to think of another thing that's not a pizza or a pie, right? But think about this as performance is multifaceted. So in my mind, they can't be a top performer if they have a toxic attitude, because this is all in terms of overall performance. I would say, just like the feedback with the other things, have the conversation. Have the conversation. Probably not when they're up here, right? Probably not at that time. Think about what is a good neutral time, neutral ground to have that conversation. But I would also say, go in with positive intent. Maybe they come from a culture where this was more tolerated and it's not okay for the culture that you're in. Maybe this is a blind spot for them. They really don't realize how toxic they are being. So I would say, honestly, it's really similar feedback to the other one of have the conversation, prepare, make sure you go in and you've got to be honest. You can still be kind though. You don't need to match their toxicity with your own toxicity. You can come in and you can have an open, honest conversation, but it needs to be done. And I would say, I would set the groundwork that, in this role, depending on what the role is, you need to be really great at these core functions, but you also need to be a great, contributing person of the, part of the team. And I'd argue that toxic attitude probably is not causing them to do that. So have the conversation. It's going to be hard, but it's not going to be as hard as you think it is. So have the conversation.
Yeah, another reason to have the conversation is that you may not see all of the impacts that person is having on the rest of the team, and it can just erode your culture. Or
right.
I've heard cancer. I've heard you refer to employees like that as a cancer. It's not just their performance. They may be highly technically proficient, but they may be holding other people down just with the way that they operate.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah. I don't see any more questions. So I guess that means we get a good review for the webinar, and that we've covered a lot of things, but we have covered a lot. I am mindful of the time. I don't want to overstep. Thank you all for joining us today. Thank you, Lauren. Thank you, Jesse. I think that was fantastic, showing what's possible and ways to make this easier by using a platform that's designed for it. So
thank you all.
Thanks
for having me. This was great.
Yeah. Thanks for including us, Marcus.
Awesome. Well, we'll do it again next month. Thank you all, and we'll see you then.